and gentlemen, greeting each and every one of you this evening, Thursday evening from Bangkok, Thailand. It's my pleasure to serve all of you as a moderator for this technical session 8 concerning critical infrastructure resilience issues. I am Joy Arunsawat. Together, sitting next to me, Mr. Nya Bui, our reporter today. Both of us are currently PhD students in Disaster Preparedness, Mitigation, and Management program of AIT. So as we are about to begin, I have to mention a few notes, kind of like the housekeeping note. So please allow me. The first thing is that the Zoom session will be recorded, and the recorded session will be made available on request. So please mention to us if you have any objection also. Okay, thank you. Our technical chair, which we have two honors co-chair with us today, will be announcing the presentations and respective presenters to all of you. After that, we will have the Q&A and the discussion at the end after all 10 presentations we have in this evening, this session. And lastly, the participant can post your questions and queries in the chat box, and I would like to request the presenter also please keep track of the chat box and answer the ones directed to you. If not, we will be discussing at the end of our session. For no further delay to kick off our session, please allow me to welcome our two co-chairs, Professor Srivalsa Kolachair and Dr. San Santoso. For Professor Kolachair, he is currently the Secretary Indian Charter of International Associations for Coastal Reservoir Research, or IACRR, and he is also an Executive Committee member of Indian Society of Earthquake Technology. Recently, Professor Kolachair was featured in Geostrata magazine by the American Society of Civil Engineers for his contribution at a young age. For Dr. Santoso, he is an associate professor of construction, engineering, and infrastructure engineering at AIT. Dr. Santoso has published many peer-reviewed articles in international journals, and his research interests are in the area of infrastructuring, planning and management in developing countries, construction project management, risk management, and private-public partner, for example. So we are really pleased and honored to have both of you with us this evening, sir. And I believe we're gonna make this session not just wonderful, but also a full sessions of learning and new experiences. So let's hear from our co-chair and presenter. I will hand over the session to both of you, sir, our co-chair, please.
Thank you. Namaste and very good evening to all of you from India. So it is my honor to be part of this great, wonderful international symposium, and it's my privilege to share the session along with Professor Dogen Santoso. So it is my honor to be with you this evening. So without further delay, with permission from Professor Santoso, shall I invite the first presenter? Yeah. So we have a presentation by Nishanka, Shavindri Nishanka, on role of financial incentives in promoting disaster resilience. So this is the first presentation among the 10 presentations we have in this session. So we'll begin with the first presentation without further delay. Please, the moderator can do the full to show the video, please.
A very good day to all of you. The topic of my presentation is Role of Financial Incentives in Embedding Disaster Resilience. This covers one of the key areas of my PhD research. Over the last 10 years, the natural hazards and its after effects have been responsible for the loss of 1.23 million human lives, victims amounting to 4 billion, and reported direct economic losses valued at 2.97 trillion. A disaster which is followed up by a natural hazard is defined as a solemn disruption to the societal functions and resulting in extensive human, economic, and environmental losses to the system, which is ideally beyond the capacity of the affected community to handle by themselves. Disasters are not only results of natural environment consequences, but rather a mix of such consequences and the vulnerabilities of the communities in the affected areas. Speaking about enhancing the disaster resilience of the built environment, it becomes very critical as most people are damaged and experiences the largest losses due to the failures in the built environment during natural hazards and their consequences. The disaster resilience of the built environment could be defined as designed, located, built, operated, and maintained in a way that maximizes the ability of built assets and associated support systems to withstand, recover from, and mitigate the impacts of extreme natural hazards and human-induced threats. Now, the real problem is, as we all know, the importance of improving the disaster resilience of the built environment has been stressed worldwide. From the Sendai framework, then Build Back Better principles, Sustainable Development Goals have re-emphasized the necessity of uplifting the disaster resilience of the built environment. However, still the losses are replicating and increasing day by day. When $1 is spent on investment in resilience, $7 are spent on reconstruction as a result of the natural hazards and their consequences. In many instances, it has been stressed upon that we need to provide additional financial support in uplifting the disaster resilience investments. Now, investing in disaster resilience becomes quite challenging due to several reasons, such as investing in disaster resilience brings the benefits in the long run, and also there's a high capital cost, and also the competing demands and the competing priorities and the limited resources makes it very difficult to segregate money for disaster resilience investments. In this setting, the need of additional financial support has been stressed upon. Now, how do you provide additional financial support? This could be done through incentives and enablers. Now, what are the incentives and enablers? Incentives and enablers are inducements offered so that actions of the stakeholders exceed the minimum level of compliance required by standards, regulations, or business as usual. Now, in the context of disaster risk, inducements offered for reducing exposure and vulnerability can be identified as incentives and enablers. There are different classifications to the incentive types, and few of the classifications are presented here. And my study will be based on the monetary reward basis classification, where they classify the incentives based as financial and non-financial. So I'll be focusing in my research on financial incentives, where the rewards are based on a monetary incentive. Now, speaking about the ways and mechanisms of how to link financial incentives with resilient practices, I have provided you few of the examples in this presentation. Now, one is financial incentives could be linked with insurance pricing adjustments. Financial incentives could not only be used in encouraging adaptation measures, but also in discouraging developments for initiatives that increases the disaster risk, such as additional extension to existing housing constructions, which were not indicated in the initial planning level. If these type of housing extensions could be charged higher insurance premiums due to increased disaster risk, the house owners will be demotivated in taking up informal constructions. Also, the second mechanism is indicating through pricing signals. Now, if the cost of construction and operation in areas could be adjusted in accordance with the associated disaster risk, then the relevant property owners will be forced to either take up resilience measures or move away from the specific locations. Now the next one is adjusting the financing cost or the loan interest rates according to the disaster risk in the area. The disaster risk needs to be incorporated into the financing cost of projects, whereas interest rates, mortgages, and debt financing structures need to reflect the increased disaster risk of a given area. Accordingly, introduction of disaster resilient properties and features in the housing buildings in the area have increased the security level of mortgage lenders, and as well as creating stronger loan collaterals than less resilient properties in some of the world contexts. The next strategy of linking the resilient practices with financial incentives is tax benefits. You can provide tax benefits for those who implement these resilience measures in their houses. One of the examples is in Louisiana. They offer the residents a tax rate reduction till 50% of the cost paid to upgrade retrofit existing homes into the compliance with the upgraded building codes, and also further provide sales tax exemption on the installation of storm shutters in windy areas. So as you can see, these financial incentives are already being used in the global context. Moving on to the next slide of my presentation. In using financial incentives for promoting resilience, there are numerous challenging circumstances also to manage. If these incentives are not properly planned, it can create market failures. Also, the property owners and other decision makers, including potential investors, could be prevented from seeing the full cost and benefits attached to the resilience investments. If the incentives are not properly aligned, this can create major issues as misalignment, as you can see on the left-hand corner, and also disintegration and lack of collaboration. And these incentives being provided in a very ad hoc manner will create issues, and also it can result in incentives itself acting as disincentives. Moving on to the final, few of the good practices of providing financial incentives are summarized at the end of my presentation, and once a proper incentive strategy is in place, all the stakeholders will naturally take up disaster resilience into their practice as it is economically prudent to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now from financial incentive, we will move to school resilience. We will have the presentation with title Developing a Framework on School Resilience for Risk-Informed Decision Making, where the authors try to develop a school safety resilience index. So we can start the presentation now.
Warm greetings. I am Vikul Nakum, currently associated with Resilience Innovation Knowledge Academy, India. Topic of our study is developing a framework on school resilience for risk-informed decision making. I will discuss the following aspects: introduction, research question and objectives, methodology, literature review, and finally, result and discussion. We are aware that schools are the part of the major critical infrastructure. It caters to the large number of children which are considered as a highly vulnerable group under the disaster context. Frameworks such as SFDR thrust on risk-informed decision making. The conventional parental school selection studies suggest that school choices are majorly done on the basis of academic aspects, mainly the curriculum, whereas there are less or no thrust on growing concerns of disaster and climate changes. There are examples such as Kumar fire tragedy and 2001 Gujarat earthquake. It points out the need of focusing on school safety along with the school curricula. So to address this issue, the researchers have conducted a literature-based research study whereby significant studies were analyzed to understand the parental school selection choices and school resilience assessment models. Key question of this study are: what are the significant factors influencing the selection of schools by parents, and what are the significant factors influencing the selection of disasters resilience? To identify answer of this question, the objectives are to carry out detailed literature review in order to understand these factors and to generate a conceptual framework. Methodology followed in this study is integrative literature review. Total 883 literature were identified from Google Scholar and Science Direct databases. Advanced search options were used to filter the insignificant literature. Evaluation were based on the abstract content and indicator-based studies, and finally, 59 literature were reviewed in more detail to develop the conceptual framework. School selection by parents related studies were identified using these keywords: school selection and parent school choices. So total 630 articles were identified, and out of them 27 research literature were reviewed in more detail to identify the significant indicators and factors contributing to the selection of the school by parents. These are the 8 themes who emerged from the literature: school academic performance, teaching staff quality, location and transportation, school environment, socio-economic cultural background, school programs and features, parent-teacher relation, and public and peer opinion. These are the factors who influences majorly the parental school selection choices. It is evident that there is no significant influence of disaster risk factors here in the literature survey. So it indicates the disconnect between school disaster resilience and parental choices. Another set of literature review done on the school disaster resilience, wherein 3 key words were used: school disaster resilience, school safety, and comprehensive school safety. This set of literature suggested 10 key dimensions of school disaster resilience: physical condition, institutional issues, disaster education, natural condition, human resources, external relationships, psychological aspects, health and hygiene, transportation safety, and cyber safety. Physical condition, including structural elements and non-structural elements, is the most recurring factor, along with the institutional issues, which include school disaster management planning related aspects. So it is evident from these 2 set of literature review that there is a disconnect between school selection and school resilience assessment, and that results in mainly the poor decision making. It is also mainly due to the target user groups of these research studies, as one of the target group is disaster management specialist who looks more into the school resilience, and another set is the parents who are more towards the school selection. So there is a need to bridge this gap, forming or promoting risk-informed decision making for improved resilience. So based on these research findings, researchers have tried to compose a conceptual framework who incorporates both these aspects. Where in this particular framework, on the one hand, we have resilience assessment indicators, and on the other hand, we have academic assessment indicators. And both these indicators can comprehensively frame a risk incorporated school assessment framework, and that leads to the risk informed school decision making. These are few of the references used in this study to understand the indicators and frame the conceptual framework.
Well, so it was an interesting presentation on school resilience. So now moving further, we have a presentation titled Public Investment Strategies for Reducing Risk of Accidents in Water Transport. So a presentation by Vachara Pejdin. So I will ask the moderator to go ahead with the presentation, please.
Hello everyone. Today I would like to give you a presentation titled Public Investment Strategies for Reducing Risk of Accidents in Water Transport. My presentation consists of 5 sections. Firstly, I would like to give you an introduction of my presentation, followed by research question and objective of the study. Then we will introduce our methodology and followed by results. Policy recommendations are discussed in the last section. Okay, let's begin with introduction. Referring to the statistic of inland water transport in Thailand during 2008-2014, it showed that 20% of water transport accidents are caused by poor vessel conditions such as engine breakdown, problem with electronic system, and other types of equipment failures. This implies that current services of water transport are not effective, and measures to enhance its safety as well as reducing risk of accident are needed. As we know that water transport services wide-range production sector in society, therefore any changes directing to its cost, it will affect the cost of production in the whole economy. By this reason, the research question for this study is how the changing in transport cost in water transport sector affect the production sector and the equilibrium in Thailand economy. And also, the objective of this study is to investigate effect of transport costs in water transport sector on Thailand production sector. Computable general equilibrium is the technique to measure impact of interaction among stakeholders in an economy. These figures show an our analysis framework. It consists of 4 agents, namely household, governments, producer, and foreign consumption. In terms of household is assumed to be identical and primarily sell the production input that are labor and capital to the producer. Each producer can only produce one product with constant production technology. All revenues from all activity in an economy have to pay for government tax. And further condition is that Thailand is assumed to be a small country. Therefore, they cannot determine the world price. In addition, the direction of each narrow is represented the original effect from each agent. In case of discrete arrow, investment consumption is assumed to be an endogenous variable in order to use for between period update. In order to see the impacts of investment of each strategy, we introduced 2 simulations that are simulation 1, investment in water transport is according to Thailand Investment in Transport Project Plan for 2022-2026. This is approximately around 100 billion baht. And simulation 2, investment in simulation 1 will be partially allocated to subsidized transport premium by allocating investment to be insurance premium, which is around 4.25%. This calculates from the distribution ratio as purchasing price of water transport indicating in input-output table 2015. The time frame for this study covers 2022-2030. By 2022-2026 is shown the investment period, and for the rest period is to validate impacts of each investment. This slide will show the production activity for our model. Each output in the economy will be produced by two components. Firstly, value added, and another one is intermediate input. In terms of value added, it consisted of two parts. First part is factor value added. This includes capital and labor, and another part is insurance value added. Insurance value added, we combine transport value added and insurance. Transport value added is consists of transport of each mode of transport, such as railway, road transport, water transport, and air transport. This slide shows the result from our simulation. It could see that investment in transport could improve welfare of community, indicating in reducing in price, increased production, and increased household consumption, particularly allocating 4.5% to insurance of water transport. It could decrease price of water transport service by 0.66%, and at the same time, it could increase water transport service by 1.5% and increase household consumption by 1.16%, indicating in the red color. By key finding from our study, we suggest that investing in water transport sector positively impact to economic indicators such as household utility, production output, and final demand. On top of that, when allocating transport investment to subsidize insurance to water transport, it could increase household utility significantly. Therefore, government should maintain investment in water transport sector in order to advantage to society. Moreover, subsidizing insurance to the sector should be taken into consideration by the government. Thank you for your.
Okay, thank you for the presentations. The next paper is about sustainability of coastal critical infrastructure, a case study of multi-purpose cyclone shelters of Gujarat.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ankit Jaiswal, presenting on sustainability of coastal critical infrastructure, a case study of multi-purpose cyclone shelters of Gujarat, India. In India, out of 7,516 kilometers of coastline, 5,700 kilometers is prone to cyclone. This keeps 40% of its population vulnerable, living in 100 kilometers of coastline. This year itself has seen 2 of the extremely severe cyclonic storms in a span of 1 month's time. In this paper, we discuss about the role of cyclone shelters as key coastal critical infrastructure and some of the challenges in management of these infrastructure. For cyclone risk mitigation, structural and non-structural measures are undertaken by coastal states of India, and multi-purpose cyclone shelter are one of the key structural measures. The paper reviews the existing model of multi-purpose cyclone shelter in coastal states of India and Bangladesh. This paper also highlights measures undertaken for sustainability of multi-purpose cyclone shelter by identifying gaps in the existing model. The National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project initiated by Government of India, focuses on creating appropriate infrastructure to mitigate impacts of cyclone. The project includes construction of Npcs to provide safe shelter during emergencies to safeguard human life and livestock. During normal time, Npcs can be used as a school, library, training centers, etc. In the following slides, I'll be sharing various Npcs models from India and Bangladesh. In 1999, Odisha was hit by super cyclone. Prior to super cyclone, Indian Red Cross Society has constructed 23 cyclone shelters, which has saved 42,000 lives during that time. The state government realized the need for construction of cyclone shelters, and at present, there are 503 multi-purpose cyclone shelters in Odisha. There are in total 814 multi-purpose cyclone and flood shelters in 25 districts of the state. The Shelter Management and Maintenance Committee are formed for day-to-day maintenance, and the committee has representation from different gender institutions and affiliations. West Bengal is highly vulnerable to floods and cyclone on an annual basis. The state has constructed around 250 multi-purpose cyclone shelters under various initiatives. It was found that multi-purpose cyclone shelter in West Bengal requires immediate intervention for the maintenance of infrastructure facilities. During the recent cyclone Bulbul, a basic infrastructure or basic necessity of the local population was not available in some of the multi-purpose cyclone shelters in West Bengal. In Andhra Pradesh, there are 975 cyclone shelters, and out of which 876 are in good condition. Study shows that only 8% of the rural population at risk are covered under Npcs, exposing the remaining population to cyclonic hazards. Now, talking about Bangladesh, Bangladesh has 12,078 cyclone shelters. However, poor maintenance of these cyclone shelters are major constraint. One of the prime reason is also that lack of appropriate guidelines for maintenance of cyclone shelter keeps this Npcs or multi-purpose cyclone shelter in Bangladesh with very less or inadequate amount of support from government and from non-government organizations. In Gujarat, construction of 34 multi-purpose cyclone shelters with capacity of 550 per person per shelter has been completed. For each Npcs, formation of Cyclone Shelter Management and Maintenance Committee is done through government regulation, and village response team members are formed for each shelter village, and regular training and capacity building exercise is done for the VIT members with the help of local institutions available to the nearest Npcs village. Guidelines for sustainable use of multi-purpose cyclone shelter during non-cyclone period is in place. For example, the multi-purpose cyclone shelters can be used as public health center, skill upgradation training center, e-marketing center, and health camps as and when required. Also, there is proper guideline for financial usage of revenue generated through these activities. Which brings us to the last and conclusion part of our finding for sustainability of cyclone shelters, which are ownership of community members for shelter management and maintenance is required. Capacity building of local communities and volunteers from time to time is required. Usage of cyclone shelter during non-cyclonic period is also must, and also institutionalizing of cyclone shelter management and maintenance committee is required. The last, I would like, on behalf of my co-authors, I would like to thank the organizers of this international symposium. Thank you.
Thank you. So it was a nice presentation on cyclone shelters by Ankit. So I see that all the presenters are present here. So we will have time for question answers at the end. So now we have the fifth presentation titled A Review of Risk Assessment Methodologies of Critical Infrastructure by Anil Kumar. Please.
Good evening, everyone. I am Anil Kumar. I am a doctoral researcher at Asian Institute of Technology. Today, I am going to discuss about a research paper. The title of my paper is A Review of Risk Assessment Methodologies of Critical Infrastructure. The content of the paper are as follows that I am going to discuss subsequently in detail. We understand that critical infrastructure are vital for society and economy, and sound infrastructure help in promoting economic development, sustain and inclusive growth, as well as helps in promotion of societal well-being. At the same time, these infrastructure are vulnerable to various risks. To measure this risk and to build the resilience of these critical infrastructure, the importance of resilience building has been discussed in various international conventions, such as Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, Sustainable Development Goal in Goal number 9, and African Climate Resilience Infrastructure Summit. The aim of the paper is to obtain a structured review of existing methodologies in the area of critical infrastructure risk assessment. And this aim is further divided into two objectives. The first one is to identify key risk assessment methodology for critical infrastructure. And the second one is to assess the strengths and key features of the identified risk assessment methodologies. The methodological framework adopted for this paper is a qualitative approach, which is obtained through the semi-systematic literature review. And the process involved selection of relevant journal articles, relevant papers from the important databases through identifying keywords related to the risk assessment and climate change and different combination of keywords. Critical infrastructure risks are associated with different parts of the critical infrastructure and different typology. So we understand that there are mainly 4 types of critical infrastructure layers. The first one is business or strategic layer. The second one is organizational layer. The third one is cyber layer of critical infrastructure. And the fourth one is physical layer. So how the infrastructure is placed within a geography. So in this paper, we are going to cover the critical infrastructure related to the physical layer and the processes involved in assessing risk of this particular layer. So I'm going to discuss about some of the methodologies chosen for review under this paper. The first one is Better Infrastructure Risk and Resilience, BIRR, which is developed by Argonne National Laboratory. This involves the vulnerability index metric development with sectoral approach that goes down to asset level and gives priority for protection measures from terrorist threats. The second one is Carver 2, developed by NIS Center for Infrastructure Expertise. It is a non-technical method for comparing and ranking critical infrastructure. Carver covers both terrorist threats as well as natural disasters. So thus implementing an all-hazard approach. It also covers the cultural site risk assessment and helps to identify interdependencies of the sectors. Third one is Critical Infrastructure Modeling Simulation, SIMS, developed by Idaho National Laboratory in the US. This portrays the visual interoperability of numerous infrastructure sectors, and it also provides a model for open source information. This focuses on the interdependencies of the infrastructure. So we can say that this is an important tool to assess the interdependencies of the infrastructure sectors. We cannot call it a risk assessment tool for critical infrastructure. The next one is multi-criteria analysis, MCA. MCA is an important tool for risk assessment that has different components, which are decision variants, a set of criteria, and set of performance measures. The essence of MCA involves risk assessment by means of predetermined criteria using a semi-quantitative method. This is a very important tool for risk assessment, and this is very handy also for the operators to perform the risk assessment. The next one is critical infrastructure protection modeling analysis, SIGMA. SIGMA is an important tool developed by Australian government, and it is basically a software-based tool that involves simulation models, economic models, databases, and GIS tools. The methodology focuses on four main areas: the critical infrastructure failure consequences, single point of failure, elaboration of risk map, and investment and mitigation strategies. The sixth one is ComAspen. ComAspen is an agent-based tool that works for interdependencies of the telecommunication and power sector and other infrastructure sectors. The idea behind this modeling technique is to able network outage impact on dependent infrastructure. This is not a risk assessment methodology or tool, but we can say that this is an impact assessment tool. The next one is GIS-based framework for climate change risk assessment of critical infrastructure. This is an important tool that we have elaborated in detail in our paper. This method talks of risks of critical infrastructure from climate change and related hazards. So the framework considers single or multi-sectoral geospatial risk analysis using relative risk ranking maps. The risk screening approach considers the geospatial proximity of climate infrastructure assets to climate change risk. This framework also quantifies and locates the portion of infrastructure networks at risk under present and future climate change scenarios. So to conclude, the risk assessment methodology of critical infrastructure depends on various factors that are hazard typology, critical infrastructure typology, that is object-oriented system or network-oriented system, the interconnectedness of different infrastructure together, and methods to be adopted for risk assessment, and the priority of any organization to conduct the risk assessment, and the data availability and accessibility. So before starting any risk assessment process for critical infrastructure, we should consider these points in our mind. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anil Kumar, with different perspective on the risk assessments of critical infrastructure. Now we move on the solar energy systems as critical infrastructure in community resilience building. This is a case study from South Asia.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Parimita Mohanty from UNEP, and I will be presenting our paper on solar energy system as critical infrastructure in community resilience building, case studies from Asia. And this paper is co-authored by myself, Dr. Indrajit Pal from AIT, and Professor Joyasri Roy, Bangabandhu Chair Professor, AIT. So I just want to give a kind of context to this paper. What factors that basically contribute to community resilience? In fact, there are a number of factors that contribute. And one of the most important one is associated power outage, which happened due to impact on power infrastructure in extreme weather events. And due to that power outage, interruptions in the basic functionality in a community services hampered. For example, the illuminations in the street lights, water supply, health centers, facilities, all those things got impacted due to power outage. Similarly, in drought-prone areas, power scarcity interrupts irrigation facilities, which also trigger for lesser agricultural productivity. So basically, resilient communities need resilient power infrastructure to maintain community resilience. So that triggers us to our research question. And the research question that we try to address through this paper is, can resilience to critical infrastructure such as power in community scale be strengthened through distributed energy supply systems? What methodology we have followed? We have done lots of desk research and literature review and find out different papers related to this. We consolidate number of best practices and case studies from different countries, and we did analysis and come out with inferences and recommendations. So the case studies, first case studies, what we have considered is from Nepal, and it's a distributed renewable energy system being implemented in one of the VDC, that is the Village Development Committee, called Thingan, in Makwanpur district, as shown in the map. What are the kind of climate resilience challenges that they were facing? The most important factor or the impact was loss of agriculture related livelihoods. Since this particular VTC is in a very geographically disadvantaged region, distribution of power or the conventional power system in that VTC was not possible. And that's also triggered to loss of agricultural related livelihoods, impact on health, availability of water at the point of consumption. So those are the kind of issues being faced. And then the distributed renewable system have been installed. So there was a 28 kilowatt solar, wind and micro hydro tri-generation system installed. And because of that, lots of services can be provided in those regions. For example, electricity supply to residential, to commercial shops, to community entities such as police post, health post, church, school, community water pumping facilities. So all those different services can be provided. A refrigerator in health post operated throughout the year, and that also facilitated more medical facilities being given to the community. So there are different kind of options and services that have been provided, but the most important one was, because electricity was available, lots of other alternate livelihoods options can be created or was created. However, in addition to the alternate livelihood options, even the agricultural productivity got improved because of the better irrigation facilities in that region. Provision of vaccines and emergency medication through refrigeration also address number of health issues and availability of potable water. So here we can see that how the climate resilience building happens because of the intervention of the renewable energy systems. Now come to our second case studies, which is from India, and it's from two different sectors. One are rural health centers and second is on the Cyclone shelter. And the examples what we have picked is from Chhattisgarh and Odisha, two different states in India. The climate change challenges that they have faced is because of unavailability of power of electricity. The public health centers were not fully equipped to provide the medical facilities in Odisha. Being in one of the coastal region, lots of cyclone and storms, those kind of things happen, which also create lots of damages in the state. In Chhattisgarh, in the public health center, the solar system have been installed, and it has given lots of facilities, lights and fans in the OPT rooms, labor rooms, cold chain rooms, all those electricity supply to the deep freezer, to the vaccine container. So lots of services can be provided through public health center because of the power availability there. Similarly, in the cyclone shelter, whenever the community stays there after the disaster happens, the lights, fans, mobile charging and drinking water facility have been provided through the solar systems endocyclone shelter. Come to the third case studies, which is from our own project Empower, which we were implementing in Cambodia. And this example is on the solar water pumping system to strengthen the irrigation infrastructure. So this is from one district called Pakistan. So in Cambodia, particularly in this village, what they have observed that although water availability is there in the main canal, but due to the unavailability of water in the sub-canal, it cannot distribute water to the nearby agricultural lands, particularly in the dry season, and lesser water availability created lots of loss in the agricultural produce. And as we know, Cambodia is one of the countries heavily reliant on agricultural production. So here basically what we are doing is implementing community-based solar irrigation facilities, which can then pump water from the main canal into the sub-canal. So through this way, the agricultural productivity can be improved in those regions. And this table also shows how before the interventions and after the interventions, the kind of impact that this project interventions or this solar irrigation interventions is going to make. So this also shows how the greater availability of water for irrigation improves the agricultural productivity. So from all those examples, we can infer that renewable energy can be used as a tool for climate resilience building in the communities and should be promoted further. So what kind of recommendations that we can give is a master planning of critical infrastructure needs to be done, and it needs to be integrated with the renewable energy systems wherever possible. If possible, there should be a kind of dedicated fund for renewable energy for climate resilience building, and more number of similar interventions should be adopted and implemented. We should also promote number of innovations, for example, design contests and the kind of newer products to be launched. We should institutionalize the whole process. For example, facilitate book of coordination between various stakeholders. We should come out with proper guidelines and action plans to increase the resilience of critical infrastructure while including RE as a tool for climate resilience. And we should also facilitate knowledge sharing, training, and capacity building around renewable energy and climate resilience building. This way, we hope that the more number of similar interventions can be integrated, can be included, and scaled up in future.
Thank you. So it was a good presentation by Paramita. So now we will move on to the next presentation by Sherito Poyot on impact of COVID-19 on higher education institutions in Northern Mindanao and Manila City, a pandemic recovery and rehabilitation strategic plan. So we look forward to hear this excellent presentation. Please.
Good day to everyone. This is Dr. Sherito Poyot from Tagub City, Misamis Occidental, Philippines, a student of Philippine School of Business Administration. Today, I wish to present my paper entitled Impact of COVID-19 on Higher Education Institutions in Northern Mindanao and Manila City, a Pandemic Recovery and Rehabilitation Strategic Plan. Impact of COVID-19 on higher education institutions. The spread of COVID-19 has sent shockwaves across the globe. The public health crisis, unprecedented in the lifetime of the people, has caused severe human suffering and loss of life. It has drastically reshaped the methods of learning globally, affecting the learning processes and how higher education institutions train the youth to face and explore the changing technological environment. It has created chaos, making traditional way of learning impossible. Now, we come to the argument. COVID-19 has severely impacted the Philippines education systems. Its outbreak led to the shutdown of higher education institutions, especially in northern Mindanao and Manila, due to the lack of IT infrastructure for virtual. Pilot institutions, the PSBA, Manila, and Governor Alfonso Ditan College, Tangub City, Misamis Occidental, Northern Mindanao. This study aims to identify the impacts of COVID-19 to higher education institutions in Northern Mindanao and Manila City, with Governor Alfonso Ditan College, Tangub City, and Philippine School of Business Administration, Manila, as pilot institutions. Now, I wish to present my conceptual framework, review of related literature and secondary data, the COVID-19 pandemic impact to the higher institutions in terms of the following essentials: the mode of learning, faculty and supporting staff capacity and working hours, examination and grading policy, students' perspective towards online learning, availability of technology, pilot study selection criteria, identifying indicators and corresponding parameters in assessing essential impacted by COVID-19 pandemic through review of secondary data, diagnostic and need assessment and costing, key personal survey, statistical compendium, then analysis, financial feasibility, and interpretation that result to pandemic-19, pandemic recovery and rehabilitation strategic plans for Governor Alfonso Ditan College and Philippine School of Business Administration. Analysis, financial feasibility, and interpretation towards COVID-19 pandemic recovery and rehabilitation strategic plans in coping the changes in learning mode or ensuring quality education. Methodology. Qualitative and quantitative methods are used in identifying the COVID-19 impact and formulating guiding principles for developing the said strategic plan. And we have the 5 steps of strategic planning process. Step 1 is the definition of strategic attributes. We have the core values, guiding principles for organization. Vision, the picture of the future as seen by the organization. Mission, a goal of the highest level of abstraction, a context for all other goals and actions. Step 2 is the formulation, the strategic priorities, the pillars for the future strategy, the frameworks, the balanced scorecard, SWOT, BRU, pistol, gap analysis, and risk. Step 3 is description, business goals, building blocks of the strategy, formulate strategic hypotheses, quantification of the business goals that make them tangible, leading metrics, qualification of success factors, strategic map, business goals connected by cause and effect logic, initiatives, action plans aligned with goals of KPIs and budgets, lagging metrics, validation of the result achieved. Then step 4 is cascading. Step 5, execution, working on strategic initiatives, tracking efforts and results with KPIs and reporting. Study Recovery and Rehabilitation Strategic Plan. The main activity of the plan is the utilization of MS Teams application as a platform for virtual learning adopted by Governor Alfonso Ditan College, Tangub City. The main activity of the plan, training on Google Suite for Education, was conducted for its faculty. The same application as a platform for virtual learning adopted by Peace Bay, Manila. Computers were also procured and special classrooms with internet were set up for virtual learning. The institution successfully adapted the changes, guaranteeing quality education despite outbreak. Conclusion and recommendation. The institution successfully adapted to the changes, guaranteeing quality education despite the outbreak. This study is beneficial to the Commission on Higher Education, CHED, institutions, teachers, students, and the community. Certainly, this methodology can be contextualized and replicated by other institutions in developing their corresponding PRR strategic plans. In behalf of the administrators of the Philippine School of Business Administration, President of Peace Bay, Manila, Jose F. Peralta, Dean, External Education, Graduate School of Business, Dr. Tabazam Raza, and Graduate School of Business faculty and staff. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you. It's interesting framework. Okay, now the next one, we will come back to the energy sector. So Dr. Kampanath Silva will present on the contributions of energy resilience assessments to sustainable operations of a rural microgrid.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kampanath Silva from National Energy Technology Center, or NTEC, a new member of National Science and Technology Development Agency, NASDA. Today, I'll be presenting our joint effort with Asian Development College for Community Economy and Technology, or ADICET, of Chiang Mai Ratchapat University, CMRU, on contribution of energy resilience assessment to sustainable operation of rural microgrid. I'll be starting with one of our focus on renewable energy by linking it with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. You would see from this figure that many SDGs support renewable energy, starting from the one that is very obvious, goal number 7, affordable and clean energy, to goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities, which enhance the usage of renewable energy, and goal number 13, climate action, which promote renewable energy as one of the means to reduce carbon emission. I would like to take a closer look to SDG 13, climate action. Apart from target number 13.2, there is also target number 13.1 on strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters. And actually, this also includes the strengthening the resilience of electricity generating system. Until now, we have been thinking of renewable energy as one of the means to address climate change. But we also need to look at the other aspect, that renewable energy themselves also need to adapt to climate change. So here comes the concept of energy resilience, which extend the energy risk assessment that focus more on the preparation and absorption of risk toward the energy system. But when we talk about resilience, we are focusing more on the two capacity, namely the recovery capacity and adaptive capacity of the renewable energy system. But actually, energy resilience have no common definition yet. And we have been doing quite a lot to try to evaluate the landscape of energy resilience research, which you will find our contribution DRSD 21211 by Mr. Pitpong Janta about more detail on this definition and landscape of energy resilience. This is the pilot project of NTech on energy resilience assessment. We made an assessment of 4 different renewable systems, starting from on-grid solar, off-grid solar, biomass, and biogas. These 4 systems are not different only in terms of types of energy, but also in terms of their characteristics. The on-grid solar is a state-owned power plant, while the off-grid solar is a rural microgrid. Biomass power plant is a commercial power plant, and the biogas plant is a commercial plant. Today, I will be focusing on the off-grid solar on the left bottom side, which is a rural microgrid. The 100 kilowatt microgrid at Ban Padan is a solar power plant microgrid with a capacity of 100 kilowatt, and the connection mode is off-grid with battery of capacity of 300 kilowatt hour with a diesel generator and also a standalone electrical grid. It's at Ban Padan, Thakat, Meta in Lamphun province, and the owner of this microgrid is Thakat Neur municipality. We perform energy resilience assessment, which we would found that it's very, very similar to energy risk assessment. But apart from the 2 last steps, apart from assessing the risk, we also assess the change over time of the risk, because the change over time will help us identify the recovery and also adaptive capacity of the system. And then we identify the resilience measures. So one thing that this will be very different from the energy resilience assessment of the commercial power plants is that when we evaluate the appropriateness of resilience measures, we are not thinking about the cost-benefit analysis, which is used to evaluate the feasibility of the resilience measures in terms of cost effectiveness. So in commercial power plant, we normally use the net present value or the payback period to evaluate the resilience measures. And actually, you will find that in another of our contribution on cost-benefit analysis of resilience measures, DRSD 21108, being presented by Ms. Pitchya Lakpatum Wongsakorn. But for the community power plant, actually, it is there to ensure the accessibility of the electricity. So the projects are normally not feasible, and also the resilience measures. So the main point here is to ensure the sustainable use of the electricity in the community by seeing whether the measures benefit the majority of the people, and also by seeing how to access to the capital investment. So these are our selected resilience measures, starting from raising awareness and sense of belonging of the community, maintaining equipment and storing spare parts, enhancing preparedness and response to natural disasters, and planning for electricity billing and management of community fund. And I will be talking a little more in detail on the last one. So here is an example of planning for electricity billing and management of community fund. We see the actual statistics of electricity usage and also try to forecast the future usage. So you see here that the current usage by the community is just like 10 kilowatt on average. So it's around 10%. But actually there is also growth of usage, and it should be forecasted based on discussion with the community members, whether it would exceed 100 kilowatt in the future or not. And we assume several things to get the budget needed, whether it's the cost for diesel fuel, the spare parts, the maintenance, the cost for the new solar panels, the cost for the new battery. And we come up with the total budget of over 8 million Thai baht, which is approximately 400 Thai baht per year. Unfortunately, current income from the electricity bills is approximately 100,000 Thai baht, which is so far below the target. So what we need to do is we need to encourage further usage of electricity, and we also need to talk with the municipal government that the billing of the street lights and also the electricity for the temple and for the school need to be paid by the municipality. These are the concluding remarks. The energy resilience assessment of the 100 kilowatt microgrid at Ban Padan, Lamphun, Thailand, showed how energy resilience can contribute to sustainable operation of a rural microgrid. And we see that the sustainable use of the microgrid should be the focus during the selection of resilience measures. And we discussed in detail about the planning for electricity billing and management of community fund. And we found that in order to ensure the sustainable use of the 100 kilowatt microgrid, we need to promote further usage of electricity, but we need to be careful not to exceed 100 kilowatt. And the billing of the common usage should be sent to the municipal government. So that's all for this contribution. And I would be happy to answer to any questions, whether here at the conference or via email. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the nice presentation on energy resilience. So now we have the second last presentation by Muhammad T.M. Ahmed on non-linear specific ground response study for soil sites in Port Sudan Harbor. Please, Muhammad T.M. Ahmed.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I would like to share with you my study about nonlinear site-specific ground response conducted at the Port Sudan Harbor. The effect of shallow soil condition on modifying earthquake parameter is really known from many past earthquake demonstrated the rule of soil condition. The harbor is located in the active earthquake zone, very active earthquake zone, and one may expect up to 6.5 or up to 7 G in this region for maybe for in the presence of loose or saturated material, soil liquefaction may occur. However, we perform here site-specific ground response analysis using the computer software Deep Soil. We use the nonlinear as it takes into account the complete linearity of the material. The two sites have shown in this figure. Side one is relatively looser and near the shoreline. Side two is far away. The boring logs we have collected is shown here. The water table for side one is changing from 2.5 meter to 4 meter. For side two, the water table changing from 2 meter to 3.5 meter. And some laboratory tests were not available, so that we assume the unit weight of the material as 18.5 for the clay, 20 kilonewton per meter square for density material, and 19 for the looser material. Also, the strong ground motion record were not available, so that we have used the Luma Prieta earthquake and Imperial Valley earthquake time history, but we adjust this to the list available published expected G level at the port site according to this publication is 0.62 G. So we adjust this and scale it to 0.62. The dynamic soil property, one of the important things here is the shear wave velocity. Although the computer program also provides the shear wave velocity, here we use the closed form formula for computing the shear wave velocity, and the difference is really within 10%. We may say that we are within 90% confident interval. As a result, due to the time, we will discuss the acceleration response time history and the Fourier amplification and the response spectra. The maximum acceleration we get as a surface is 1.5 to 1.4 in response to Aluma Prieta and Imperial Valley earthquakes, and the amplification is observed to be 0.25 and 0.22 for those locations. The maximum acceleration was found to be 1.37 at a period of 0.3 in Site 2, which is close to the period of the fundamental period of the soil column we consider. And this information, or this fact must be accounted for when designing such a structure in the port region. For Luma Prieta motion, it's observed that it's influencing shorter period of soil. The maximum amplification observed for side 1 and 2 response to Luma Prieta input motion is 7.4 and 8.5, occurring at a predominant frequency of 0.25 and 0.8 hertz respectively. Amplification at site 2 observed to be ranging from 7.3 to 2.5 at a frequency of about 6.2 to 2.5. So the role of soil condition on modifying earthquake motion is demonstrated in this study. The natural period of the site, although we do not present the some of the figures that in the paper due to the time and the length of the presentation is close to the period of the structure. In those regions, most of the structure is on plus 5 G, which means in range of 0.4 to 0.3 second. And this fact, as I said, must be accounted for when designing such a structure in those regions. We have presented the spectral acceleration at 0.5 damping ratio for the design purpose. Amplification of the soil anticipated up to 2.5 in this region. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are very glad to have a participant from Sudan, Africa. Now we reach to the last presenter about policy, institutional advancements, and challenge in making critical infrastructure disaster resilience by Mr. Sujit Kumar Mohanty.
Colleagues, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, based on where you are. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank the organizers for the opportunity to present in this important academic conference. My name is Sujit Mohanty, a research student at the KU University. I also work at the United Nations Office for Disastrous Reduction. However, today I'm presenting here in my capacity as a PhD student from the KU University. My topic today is focused on policy and institutional advancements in making critical infrastructure resilient. And my presentation will touch upon why resilience of critical infrastructure matters, and will mainly focus on looking at the policy and institutional advancements made in this important area, which is also the target D of the Sendai framework for DRR. And I will look at some of the monitoring elements from the Sendai framework for target D. I will also briefly touch upon the key challenges and gaps and opportunities in making critical infrastructure resilient. So why it matters? So we are all aware that that critical infrastructure are the backbone of our modern and interconnected societies, but sometimes the notion of infrastructure is sort of mainly as the built environment or the physical part of the infrastructure. However, the disruption of crucial systems and essential services such as telecommunication, energy or water supply or transportation or financial systems can result in substantial economic losses and damages, which can be much more than the loss of infrastructure or the physical infrastructure only. These systems are highly exposed and vulnerable to a variety of key events ranging from natural man-made hazards to even pandemics, terrorism, cyber attacks, you name it. And this can trigger a cascading and negative impact locally and even globally. Given this hyperconnectivity of these core infrastructure assets and compounded by a digital transformation, which we all are witnessing, the risk to critical infrastructure and associated infrastructure systems are far more than before. And at the same time, the world requires significant development of new infrastructure. As we know, trillions of dollars of infrastructure investment is needed globally. We are already witnessing the massive investments in infrastructure globally. So at this point, this is really critical that a comprehensive public policies and institutional arrangements are in place to ensure that the resilience of the existing infrastructure as well as the infrastructure which is yet to be built are really critically seen. Now, moving on to the relevance of the resilience of critical infrastructure in Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. As you know, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is the successor international framework of the Hyogo Framework for Action, brought the issue of critical infrastructure with a lot of prominence in the Sendai Framework. And perhaps as our understanding evolved through the learning of HFA, the global community realized the criticality of the issue of resilience of critical infrastructure and its associated systems. And now you know that out of the 7 targets of Sendai Framework that was agreed by all member states, one of the prominent target is Target D, which is focused on the substantial reduction of disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. Now, the measurement of the achievements of the Target D is done through 8 indicators, which was developed through a long consultative process with the member states and experts through the open-ended intergovernmental experts working group. All countries report on damage to critical infrastructure, health facilities, education facilities, and disruption to services, including health and education services through Sendai monitoring system. Here you can see that there are 8 indicators with D1 and which is a compound indicator of D2, D3, and D4, and essentially looks at damage to critical infrastructure or the physical side of the critical infrastructure. And D5 is a compound indicator that is a combination of D6, D7, and D8, which is essentially looks at disruption to basic services. Now, in terms of the uptake of member states to measure critical infrastructure resilience through these indicators, countries report them through the Sendai monitoring system. However, within the 2015-2019 reporting period, what we have seen is that reporting on Target D was overall low, and there were no significant change in the number of and percentage of countries reporting for each year. And we have seen that reporting by countries remained mostly below 30%, which is visible on this graph. The second graph, which is the percentage of reporting countries across all regions, is also and for the same period is also equally low. We have seen it in most of the regions. It's sort of goes from 16 to 40-45% maximum in most of the country, and this clearly shows that there is a need for improvement of data gathering by countries on these targets to understand how they are progressing on the Target D, or how they are progressing towards minimizing losses in critical infrastructure. However, in the last 15 years, there are also some good progress in terms of policy and institutional arrangements, which can be seen from numerous reports of HFA and Sendai Framework monitoring reports. As per the global assessment report, we over a 90 country have a DRR focal point in the government, and over 100 countries have established a dedicated DRR or a disaster management institution. The policy setting for the resilience of critical infrastructure often we have seen enshrined within the national and local DRR strategies. In terms of advancement in the national local DRR strategies, which is also part of the Target E of Sendai framework, we have seen around 96 countries reported having either a national or local DRR strategy in place by August 2020. However, that does not indicate whether the strategies fully include policies and strategies to make critical infrastructure and associated systems resilient or not. There are also evidence of countries having dedicated strategies or programs for critical infrastructure resilience. And based on literature review and available data from OECD countries, it is evident that 28 countries out of 34 OECD countries who responded to a survey by OECD Secretariat have either a critical infrastructure resilience strategy or a program, which is almost 90% of the OECD countries. And in addition, the survey also shows that most OECD countries have established some sort of information sharing platform or good variety of policy tool or practices are available to foster resilient investment in infrastructure in these OECD countries. Now, although some advancements can be seen from Sendai Framework Monitor and reports from other UN and international organizations, still a huge amount of challenge and gaps remains to be tackled in the area of reducing risk to critical infrastructure from governance or policy perspective. Governments indeed dedicated attention to protection of critical infrastructure from several decades. However, the shift towards a resilience-based approach is now prompted by the considerable degree of uncertainty about the intensity and the complexity of future disasters and their potential impacts on infrastructure. Whether it is the uncertainties or the changing climate or the digital, so-called the digital transformation and the dependencies on highly interconnected systems, the policies requires continuous update and adapt to new and evolving realities. Defining also, in terms of defining resilience of critical infrastructure, is also still remains a challenge within the ever-evolving nature of risk, including the systemic and cascading nature of risk, which we are discussing in depth these days with all in all forums. It should also be noted that the term critical infrastructure and what fall within the purview of critical infrastructure sector is also different in different countries. And it is evident that in order to tackle uncertainty and systemic nature of risk, the critical infrastructure resilience policies and governance need to consider a more holistic and systems approach towards it, and need to consider all hazards approach, multi-sectoral approach, look at transboundary dimensions, consideration of whole infrastructure life cycle, and the entire risk management cycle. These are all essential to be seen and remains as a challenge. So some of the opportunities that countries have in scaling up their effort in bringing resilience to critical infrastructure can be, we can sum it as the need for disaster risk consideration by investors, planners, and developers at the planning stage with the right risk information and adequate regulatory framework supporting these. There's a need for broader consideration of infrastructure resilience at national level infrastructure planning, along with adequate technical capacity building in different sectors in order to apply those policies. And there is also a need for engagement of multiple sectors through a formal multi-sectoral governance arrangement at the national and subnational level. And at the same time, there need to be an effort on increasing overall awareness and knowledge of infrastructure resilience and the complexities and vulnerabilities of infrastructure and infrastructure system at all levels. So colleagues, with that, I would like to end my presentation here and look forward for any questions and clarifications. Thank you for your time and interest in listening to this presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the last presenters. So now we move to question and answer sessions. Maybe Professor Srivastava, you want to take over this one
Yeah,
first?
you are right. We can move to the question answer session. I see that there was a question addressed to Parimita Mohanty, which she has already replied in the chat box. And there is another question by Bhushan, but it is not indicated to whom that question.
If I understand correctly, this one is maybe to those participants from the Philippines.
Yeah. So if they are there, they can answer. I hope they are able to see the question in the chat box and I can read it out. So he's asking, how about including workshops or laboratory or credit system or national service as part of the curriculum? Technology substitute pro model. Can you give such model based on your grid and energy study? So the presenter can unmute and answer, I hope.
I think maybe the second question is for different presenter. I think the second question maybe is for Dr. Kampanart.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yes, Mr. Serlito.
Yes, sir. Laboratory curriculum should also be included in such a way that the subject was being installed by our students, that the education should also be good. Then workshop, yeah, it's also very important. However, in our school, we have the workshop by our faculty, and then after having such annual, they will apply to our students. That's how we did here.
Thank you. So the second question on technology substitute pro model, and he is asking, can you give such model based on your grid and energy study? So if the speaker who presented that topic is present here, if the speaker can answer, it will be great.
Okay, thank you very much, Kampanat Silva from National Energy Technology Center. So regarding the question, well, we actually studied 4 of the different types of technology. But for the rural area, we were focusing more on the off-grid solar cells. So in that case, well, actually this off-grid solar cell is substituting a little bit the diesel generator that they have been using. So in that case, we are substituting the technology that is producing quite a lot of carbon emission, producing a lot of carbon with a cleaner one. So in that sense, things are going quite well because they also installed the battery with the system. And also they are using this model to see when they apply to different rural community, whether it's possible that they use, for example, like the Napier grass within the community and produce like a biogas or biomass power plant over there. So I think that's a valid comment, and we see also the opportunity of using this model in some different communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kampanat. We have another questions. I'm not sure this is to whom. So from Loy Rigo, how do we tackle critical infrastructure? How do we link without the CDRI coalitions on disaster resilience infrastructure that India has helped secretly set up?
Yeah, recently set up. So I think.
Oh, recently, sorry, yes.
Yeah, I think, sir, this is a general question. So if any speaker wants to answer, they can give response. So actually he is asking about critical infrastructure and the CDRI coalition on disaster resilient infrastructure set up by India recently. So as I come from India, I am aware of that coalition. And even recently, our Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, also gave a 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction. And the agenda number 1 was on infrastructure, resilient infrastructure actually, and critical infrastructure. So there is a lot of focus being given. And the Prime Minister's speech on formation of the CDRI coalition is also available in the public domain. So his question is, how do we link here? Yes, there is a need to come together. So now everyone has to do knowledge sharing. The techniques has to be shared, like in the COVID pandemic also. So if somebody has invented a vaccine, that is being shared across the globe. So similarly, the techniques and schemes and systems used in other parts of the globe should reach everywhere, so that we can build a critical infrastructure resilient to disasters. So that is my opinion on that. So if Professor has something to add, please.
I may have something to add because I asked the question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I think I was, sorry, I joined the session late because I was attending another session which was interesting. I want to know, since your session was on critical infrastructure, did the subject of CDRI come up? And also, if people are not aware, you have given one pitch for it, but this is a major new initiative started by India. And I would encourage both practitioners as well as governments of the countries of our region, as well as globally, to take advantage of this and to build on it and take it up programmatically. So this is in part a question, in part a suggestion, and I would like to see the reactions. I'm sorry I came late.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind input. So very valuable point you have put forward. So as such, in this session, the CDRI was not discussed because it included a presentation by 10 different speakers on diverse topics related to critical infrastructure, but the CDRI was not touched upon. But it is a very good suggestion and comment from you for us to focus on CDRI coalition and to get benefited from that. So if Professor Santo want to add something.
Okay, I will not add on this one. Maybe I will go to the last presenter when discussing about policy and institutional advancements. Maybe Mr. Sujit Kumar Mohanty, do you have anything to say? Because somehow this topic is related with yours.
Thank you very much, Professor. And it's indeed, it links to my work. In fact, I removed some of the slides on CDRI as part of my presentation because it was becoming too many slides. So yeah, I think, our colleague Loy, which he brought up, the CDRI, it's definitely a very critical and important initiative which is led by India. And some of you might be aware that it's an international coalition where right now there are 24 countries are already part of it. And essentially it looks at really bringing that policy transformation throughout the world on making infrastructure resilient. Now, here it's both talk about the infrastructure which is already built or the existing infrastructure and the infrastructure which is yet to be built. And that definitely includes the critical infrastructure, because of course critical infrastructure is a subset of your broader infrastructure planning and infrastructure. And right now 24 countries are part of it. Number of multilateral agencies are part of it. As some of you might know, that UNDRR was also one of the founding member of this initiative. And what essentially this initiative is trying to bring this policy change actually at all country level. And this is touching upon all different, I mean, it has 8 or 9 thematic areas which looks at, capacity building at one hand, developing norms and normative tools for countries at the other hand. But it deals with all the range of infrastructure, which includes both critical infrastructure as well as the normal infrastructure which countries are yet to build. I mean, as you know, I mean, most of the South Asian, most of the developing countries, as somebody said, that 70% of India is yet to be built, and that means that 70% of India, the infrastructure development is yet to happen. So essentially, we have this opportunity that while we are developing, while the whole world is in fact developing in terms of their infrastructure, this is the opportunity to really look at how exposure of assets and infrastructure will happen over the period, and that's essentially this initiative is trying to tackle. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujit. You answered my question, but I would like to also make a pitch for CDRI, because I have been involved in some of the discussions and strongly recommend those of you who are not familiar to get familiar and think about it. Thank you.
May I add one point, sir, to it?
Please. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, sir. Basically, sir, CDRI has recently started a fellowship program. The study that I presented has been funded by CDRI, and it is also in the process of announcing the next program very recently. So it is basically encouraging the young youths and professionals who are working in the disaster management sector to come up with new ideas, new innovations with respect to make the infrastructure resilient. Thank you.
Is there any additional comment or maybe questions? We have 1 minute. If not, then I will ask the last questions if time allow, maybe to the second presenter about school resilience. Yeah, Mr. Vipul, that's a good idea of considering the school resilience here, but I want to know the difference with what typically parents consider of choosing school, because the information are available. Okay, parent can access the information. Now, if you are proposing about the school resilience, how you expect that information is available to parents to access and consider for the admission of their children?
Yes, sir. If I have rightly understood your question, then information is available to parents. That's not a problem. But parents' consideration in choosing the school is the disaster risk considerations are not the priority that the literature says, and not only literature, but this is also in practice that the priority is more of education, how the quality or the how school is performing, or what is the performance overall result of the school or result of the students. So basically this is the idea. There are few systems like the Singapore one where the education department had started a system where the parents can give some inputs in the system, like the location or the location or the age of the student or the school, like whether parents are looking for primary school or secondary school or higher secondary school, and the system can give some suggestions to it, like what would be the best choose according to their priorities. So that if we add few disaster risk management parameters to it, then it will be very it will be very easy to also have that risk knowledge about the risk knowledge of that particular area within in our mind. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Professor Srifalsa, you have any question to the participants?
No questions, sir. We can conclude. Interest in this we have.
Okay, I will give the yes, Dr. Rego, you have any other question?
It's not so much a question, it's a discussion. It's a comment. So, one is the new infrastructure that is being built. This must be built correctly. And in fact, if we don't build correctly, as Sujit emphasized, we are running the risk of creating new risk. More importantly, there is past infrastructure that has been built, which is not resilient enough. And a certain amount of retrofitting where possible, and otherwise fixing where needed, is a huge initiative that we need to take. So some countries have taken it up. We need to strengthen, expand that base. And finally, infrastructure is about people, both people who use it and people who live in it, people who are healthy and educated because of it. And we need, therefore, to fix people's lives through infrastructure and in partnership with infrastructure, because its impact can be severe. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you very much for very useful and insightful comments. So I will say thank you to all participants for very useful and excellent presentations. Thank you for the staff and students in assisting these presentations. I will give the floor to Professor Srifalsa to close the sessions, please.
Thank you very much, Professor. So we had a very interesting session where diverse topics related to critical infrastructure has been discussed, like role of financial incentives in promoting resilience, school resilience, strategies to reduce risk, coastal critical infrastructure, case study on cyclone shelter, risk assessment methodology, then solar energy systems in promoting community resilience, impact of COVID and rehabilitation strategic plan, and contribution of energy resilience, then also site-specific ground response study, and also very importantly, lastly, we had policy and institutional advancement as well. So it covered a spectrum of topics related to critical infrastructure resilience. So I also, on my personal behalf and on behalf of the organizing committee, thank all the presenters for excellent presentations, and my special thanks to organizing committee and to my colleague who was along with me chairing this session, the Professor Santau. Also my special thanks for this opportunity, and I close this session and pass on to the organizing committee moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, our co-chair, Professor Colatier and Dr. Santoso. As a token, on behalf of the DPMM AIT, as a token of appreciation to your time and your valuable contribution to our sessions as well. Ladies and gentlemen, may I thank you so much for your active participation in this session. I hope you enjoy our program. And thank you so much for today. As now in Thailand, I have to say good evening and as well good night. So hope to see you again tomorrow. Thank you so much, everyone. ขอบคุณค่ะ